I screamed as loud as I could, but it was silent. No noise came out. And then I pulled the trigger, and 76% of all suicides in Canada are men. And the result of that is because men continually push everything down and don't deal with their emotions. Reality hit me pretty hard, pretty young. I was homeless a number of times as a teenager and lived on the streets for a couple of years. I was in and out of street gangs, escalated into all kinds of problems in my life, and everything I thought I deserved was taken away from me. Depression comes when we're not doing the things that make us happy. It's very simple. It suffocates hope, and it suffocates reality, and it suffocates light. And I had failed at everything in my life. I'd failed myself, failed in relationships, failed at jobs, I fucked up everything I had done. So when you know that you're trapped in something, there's only really two options. There's give into it and just allow time to slow burn, or you want to end it. And the only way out at that point for me was to end it.
Jason, I wanted to ask you, like, you've had such a crazy life, and we usually ask this question at the very end, but I wanted to do it at the beginning.
Okay.
If you had some advice to your younger self, what would that advice be? And I know you got that question before, but to start this off, to like really put this into perspective.
You know, it's a challenging question because, first of all, there's part of me that wouldn't want to alter younger me, because younger me had to go through all the wild rides that I went through to get where I am today. However, I will say this, is that I think if I could go back to younger Jason, I would say believe, man. You got to learn how to believe in yourself. That's something that I definitely faltered at my entire life, and I was unable to subscribe to, and it led me down all the wrong paths because I was too busy trying to please everybody else or be someone different for somebody else instead of myself. So if I could go back, the message would be believe in yourself. You'll be okay. Yeah.
Do you remember, what's the youngest memory you have as a child?
One of the youngest, I'm going to date myself here, is I went to Star Wars in the theater in 1977. I was 5 years old with my dad.
Okay.
And it was probably the biggest encapsulating moment that took imagination and just blew it out the universe, because all of a sudden I was in the, I'd never been to a movie theater back in the, back for the younger kids watching, movie theaters were, like a movie came out and it was crazy and people lined up and, yeah, I know, right? And so it was this huge epic adventure just going to a movie theater with my dad and then seeing this incredible movie, Star Wars. That would be probably one of the earliest. I have some other memories that are a little less fun and fulfilling as that. There's some memories of my mother and my father fighting a lot and some different things that happened with that, unfortunately. I have a really early memory of riding a bicycle. And so we lived on this bay in a side-by-side, and I was learning how to ride a bike. And so I remember this vividly because I was terrified, and I kept, and as long as my dad kind of held the bike and ran with me, I was able to go. But as soon as he would take the hand off, I'd freak out, cry, break down, and all the things that like children always do.
Yeah.
So my dad was running beside me and took his hand off the bike, and I didn't know, and I was riding, and then he stopped, and I realized, I'm riding this bike. And I remember I just felt like I was free, and I was flying, and I was pedaling, and I was going faster and faster. And my dad couldn't even keep up to me at this point because I was going so fast. I was just probably about 5 or 6. And but I hadn't learned how to use the brakes yet. And so, my dad's screaming, slow down, stop, and I don't know how to stop. And eventually I just went and I ran right into the side of my neighbor's car because I didn't know how to brake. And so I hit that and I went flying. And my neighbor at the time, his name was Sanjay. And so he was laughing and his dad was laughing and my dad was concerned but laughing. And, it was the first time I remember overcoming fear and overcoming the doubts that I couldn't do something. And it stuck with me till now, so it's a really prominent, powerful memory for sure. But those would be the earliest ones that I have.
I feel like that story of riding the bike is a phenomenal metaphor for life, right?
Yeah.
Like you start off by almost relying on people.
Right.
And then you learn to trust yourself, build that confidence of, hey, like I can get over this hurdle. I don't need to have someone there for me. But then there's points in life where, you know, you hit the car and you hit the shits, and it's like,
I learned how to use the brakes after that.
yeah, exactly.
But it's true, like there in that moment, and it is a really big memory for a lot of people because it's the first time you overcame fear.
Right.
It's the first time that your repetitions, you probably rode that bike many times before, but were unable to do it yourself because you were relying on the safety and trust of your parental figure, your brother, whoever it was. And so it's that first moment when you actually overcome that thing and you become independent.
Yes.
And I mean, most kids, ride a bike, and sadly some don't, but the majority of kids have that opportunity where they get that free moment and they'll remember it forever because it is sadly, it doesn't stay with a lot of people for the rest of their life. A lot of people will remember that because it was that first time that they got that really crazy spike of dopamine and all these things rushed in because they overcame the fear, they accomplished the thing, they did the goal, they were free, they weren't scared, all these things. But sadly, as life goes on, a lot of people don't get back to that. They get farther away from it as they grow. But yeah, it's a powerful moment.
100%. And, you know, like I think the reality of that is that moment of being so free, overcoming the fear, and then as we grow as adults, I think reality sets in a little bit, right? We're these dreamers as children, like I want to be an astronaut, I want to go outside of space, and then you realize, hey, like to me to go to an astronaut, I need like do crazy amount of training.
Sure.
And I think that's where the battle of mental health starts.
Yeah.
It is where that aspect of you have so many dreams and then reality hits. Where did that start for you? Like, when did you realize that, hey, like maybe I wanted to be an astronaut. Maybe I wanted to have that dopamine of riding my bicycle again.
Yeah.
And when did that first reality hit for you?
Well, reality hit me pretty hard, pretty young. I grew up quite rough and in some pretty tough, challenging circumstances. So, you know, I've always been a dreamer, and I still am. I'm still a big kid. I still, you know, it's a thing I talk about in my books often is, you know, the power of imagination. We can use it as so many things, and it keeps us younger and keeps our minds elastic and all these incredible things. But as a kid, I would say that a lot of my childhood was taken from me by some circumstances and experiences that weren't really in my control. There was a lot of physical abuse and sexual abuse in my childhood, and you know, there was a lot of alcohol abuse and violence and different things. And so, you know, for instance, like I moved so much growing up with my dad. By the time I was in grade 6, I had gone to, I think, 7 or 8 different schools. And so, you know, I was subjected to a lot of stuff. And so having said all that, the reality kind of hit me really hard early. But for me to escape that reality is where I became this huge dreamer and huge, I call it like an Imagineer, where I engineered imagination to this point where, you know, I created worlds where I lived in, where I was safe and I was happy and I was the victor instead of the victim, and you know, these things. And it's similar to like, you know, make a Marvel comic book or something where I got to be like a superhero.
Multiverse.
Sure, you know, and so it was very similar to that kind of thing. And so, but I do agree with you. I think what happens as a kid is, you know, we're in a state where we're basically recording everything around us, right? Whatever is happening, our brothers, our sisters, our parents, our grandparents, all the people around us, we're recording everything for about the first 6 or 7 years. And so you just kind of learn everything by observation. And then in that, your ego starts forming, and your ego's job is to keep you safe and all those different things. And then something happens. Like there's some kind of, you know, emotionally catastrophic moment where that gets shattered. For some kids, it's the realization that the world doesn't revolve around them anymore. You know, for some, it's, you know, parents splitting up in a divorce, or there's abuse, or there's an injury or sickness, or these different things. And so that when that comes in, I really believe that is what starts to alter someone's state of mental health very early in life, because there becomes a disconnection from the authentic to something that's counterfeit, right? So kids started having to act differently around a certain adult because of maybe their behavior, right? If their father is very angry and volatile and, it's unpredictable, well, that child will change its authentic self to mold to accommodate that personality. And that separation or that disconnection is where the ego starts to take over and create things like coping mechanisms and different ways we start to we rely on these things to help us in dangerous or threatening situations. And that separation and disconnection continues. And that's what develops into the mental health challenges is in teens, and then really becomes predominant as an adult. Because how I look at it, and I wrote about this in my first book, One Drop of Water, is it's like you basically build yourself a suit of armor as a child to protect yourself, right, from all the different things you can't control. But as you grow older, that suit stays the same size. So you outgrow it physically, but you're still wearing it, and it's it's very cumbersome and too tight, and it gets in the way of maneuverability and adaptability in life. And you carry it around with you until one day finally you either have to realize you got to take the suit off because it no longer serves you, or you have to break it apart slowly, right, and try to get it off you and fix those things. But the compromise of mental health, in my opinion, starts very early. And obviously you share this with that question that you asked me. But again, just to back up to it, I believe it's that first, like you said, there's that reality that kind of kicks in, those different sort of moments where we have to become somebody else. And as soon as we do that is when the crack in the armor happens and the mental health starts to change. So
did you feel like you were did you feel like you were better than other kids because you were like you had like a dream and you like other kids maybe didn't have those and you were thinking differently than them?
I never thought I was better. When I grew up, I had some learning disabilities and I was bullied pretty bad by kids, and I was really small, but I had a huge mouth. So I used to yap and run my mouth at all the kids, and I grew up in like some pretty bad areas, some low-income housing areas and different things. So being the only white kid in a lot of those areas, I was in a lot of situations that my mouth certainly didn't help me with, so I became a very fast runner. But sorry, I forgot where we're going.
In terms of because you were dreaming so big.
Right. So I didn't think that I was like better than any of the kids. It was probably more the opposite. I felt, a lot of them would have, toys and different things I wanted, and I didn't have that. So I had some insecurities as a kid. And because I wasn't learning on the same level as them, and classrooms weren't set up for kids with different challenges back then. So it was tough. But where I felt like I was different was in my imagination, in my world, I often saved the people that were mean to me. Sometimes I often killed them, I'll be honest. There's times when maybe I thought of shooting lasers out of my eyes and, like decapitating them or whatever it was. But
claws out.
Sure, yeah, Wolverine, like hacking them up. But for the most part, I've never felt that way. And I've never had a superiority complex until I got into my being an adult, and that's sort of when my ego flipped on me, and I became sort of the opposite of how I kind of grew up. I felt very envious and jealous of most children that I went to school with. I never really fit in with kids as much. Like I always had some friends. Like I had a core group usually, but like I said, going to so many different schools, I had to constantly reinvent myself, which is a difficult thing as a little kid. Mm-hmm. So that turned into a lot of lying and storytelling because I wanted people to like me very quickly. I remember telling people like my dad was Hulk Hogan and stuff, like these things and different, like all these stupid things. And because I just wanted people to like me so badly. And it just would always backfire, right? Within, obviously, my dad was not Hulk Hogan. And so, kids would find that out. And my dad was a big, weightlifter and bodybuilder, and he rode a Harley and had long blonde hair. So it might have worked for like the one drive-by or something like that. But, realistically, what would I be doing living in some poor, crappy area in Winnipeg if that was my dad? So,
That's so interesting, right? That a lot of us have a very similar experience. At the core of our childhood, we just want to be liked, and we just want to fit in. And oftentimes, we are shaped by like the bullying that happens or the teasing, and we start to change this narrative about ourselves just to fit in.
yeah.
One thing you said was you'd have this imagination of your bullies, and you would often save them. Why?
Because I wanted to be a hero. I wanted to be, in the time I didn't understand it, but as I've gone back, and I really dug into my past and the experiences to heal myself, I realized that I wanted to become the person that I needed to come save me. And, I didn't realize that for a really long time in my life. And I wish I had sooner because it was such a game changer. But so at the time, I think it was just more like I wanted everyone to like me in my fantasy world, that I had imagineered and all these really cool things. And so I always liked being that victor, or being like, people cheering for me and like, all these things. And I didn't really realize it, but by saving the people that wanted to hurt me the most, is probably one of the better statements of like generosity and kindness and humility that that someone could display. Did I know that as a kid? Probably not so much. It was more about I want to just be that really impactful hero. But when you dive into yourself and you want to learn about who you are and what made you who you are, you have to explore all the stories, and you have to explore all the experiences and the scenarios within those experiences. And what I've done to really understand that is I devised a strategy for myself where I would write out, what happened, and then I would write out all the facts of what actually happened, and then I'd write out all the feelings. And facts are, like what time it was, what the weather was like, where it happened, what happened, the sort of non-negotiables of that experience. And then the feelings, feelings are a funny thing because we distort them. The longer we have them, the longer we distort that feeling. It's a lot like telephone tag, right? Like where you're like, here, I'll tell you something, then you say it, then you say it. Sure. By the time it comes back around 20 people, it's a completely different thing. And we do that with ourselves, and our feelings dictate that. Our feelings lie to us, and it's very easy to manipulate them to accommodate the story that we want to tell ourselves, so we feel better, or we remain the victim, or whatever it is.
Is that later on in life, or while it's
No,
happening?
this is what I did later.
Yeah.
And so when I started really examining these things, that's when I was able to dive into my childhood and really look at the facts of what happened. Because, decades of me telling myself stories about it was very misconstrued. Gotcha. And, some of it was at this point very far from the fact. And when in that exercise, what's really beneficial about it for you or anybody that does it, or for myself, is that it gives you that understanding, because like you just said, you start to realize that we all have very similar experiences. The difference is the feelings that are, some people will take the feeling after something is wrong to them and they become a champion from it. Other people's become the victim, and some people become, in a state of limbo where they just allow whatever to happen because they're too afraid to go after something and not defend against it, right? So definitely can shape either way.
Right.
I want to dive into a story that I heard. Did you take an IQ test as a younger kid?
I took a couple.
Yeah, and then what was the result of that?
Well, so the first one, I was in grade. What happened is I went to a new school. It's called Beaver Lodge Elementary in Charleswood. And I went there in grade 5, and I had a teacher, Mr. Burnett, incredible teacher. I rave about this guy constantly, mentor. I thank him in my books. I talk about him. And I was in all kinds of trouble by this point at all these other schools, getting suspended and very, misbehaving and all these things. And he just had this incredible kind way with me. I attended every class. In fact, I learned more in that year than I have in all other years in school combined, because I liked him and he treated me differently. He gave me responsibilities and all this. But he kind of spoiled me. And the next year I went into another classroom and I had this teacher named Mrs. Chester, and she and I were like fire and water. We were just not meant to, not meant to be. And so it got worse and worse. And it got to a point where I got in a lot of trouble. And I was getting bullied by this really big kid. His name was Clinton, and he was like, you know, that one kid in like grade 6 that was already a man basically. And he was that, and I was just a little tiny skinny kid. And so it was a really defining moment. I was on a breakaway playing floor hockey, and the girl that I had a crush on, her name was Pam, was watching, and he tripped me, and so I fell, and as I did, I was shooting, and the ball actually went and hit her in the face, and so she was really mad at me, and I was devastated. And I went into the classroom and I got a pair of scissors and I chased him. I was really upset. And so, it's a little bit violent, a little excessive for sure. And so all these things ensued. And so my desk was put into the principal's office and I wasn't allowed out at recess. I had to be walked to and from school with a parental chaperone. Wow. And I wasn't allowed out at lunch or gym class and all these things. And so...
What happened to Pam?
I have no idea.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I have no idea. Okay. She actually moved away, so maybe she was so mad at me. I don't know.
Okay, fair.
And so, but during that course, they started, people knew there's some stuff going on, obviously, from my past, and my behaviors were, telling a story to them, so they wanted to do that. So they had a bunch of guidance counselors work with me, and psychotherapists, and child psychologists, and psychiatrists, and then, were they going to medicate me, and all these different things. And I became really well-versed in, really screwing with their heads, and, I would just outsmart them, and where I had some learning disabilities on comprehension side, my imagination and the other part of my brain was at this very high level. And so at that time, I didn't have a lot of toys. My dad was selling encyclopedias earlier, so we had tons of encyclopedias. And again, for the younger kids, encyclopedias are basically like Google, but in books.
In what?
Yeah, I know what. And so I would read these and memorize all these different things, and I just was fascinated by it. Anyways, so I met they brought this one social worker in, and he was named John Smith, and that's his real name, and kind of looked like Flanders from The Simpsons, but really good guy, and he was really smart. I loved animals, I loved comic books, so he'd bring me a couple comic books, get me to talk about them, take me to the zoo, get me to teach him about all the animals, like the things I really liked, and he built this rapport with me that no one else had been able to do. And he started to realize that I was quite brilliant and wanted to explore that, but in a good way. Mm-hmm. So he brought in a IQ test and asked if I would do it and talk to my parents and this and that. And I said, sure. And because he asked me to do it, I actually wanted to do it. And so I wrote the initial test, and I scored quite high on it with the exception of mathematics. I had some problems with math. Problem-solving mathematics, pretty good. Mm-hmm. But, integers, fractions, algebra, all that kind of stuff, just my brain couldn't really wrap around it at that time. So they got the results, and then they accused me of cheating. Not John Smith, but the faculty, like the school advisors. And that really pissed me off. And then so they said, we want you to write another one. And what they actually brought in was a university-level test for this one. Mm. And I actually scored higher on this one because I was really pissed off that they... Mm. Because my dad asked me, and he said, son, did you cheat? And I'm like, no. How could I cheat? I don't even know what the questions are.
Yeah.
But the way my brain kind of is designed from, the different things I've gone through and that, is that one side of my brain, they're not really connected well. There's sort of like a neural bridge that connects your analytical and your imaginative side of the brain. And I was born with a bit of brain damage, and so those links aren't there as strongly. So often I'd be very impulsive, or different things would happen, and I wouldn't have consequence fire off like the average brain would. Mm-hmm. They call that neurodivergence now, but back then that term didn't exist. And so, anyways, I did this second test, and I remember thinking, this is harder. And I was just inside, I just had this fire burning. I was so mad, and I was so heartbroken that John Smith asked me if I cheated. And he only did because, he was told to.
Yeah.
And so I scored even higher on this, and this was a university level entry sort of IQ test. And again, very, very comprehensive, but again, mathematics was the only subject that I had some problems with. And at that point, they were like, oh my goodness, we have this child prodigy now, right? So I went from like, you know, the problem child to like, maybe we should put him up 4 or 5 grades and excel him and do this. And then they took me to the University of Manitoba, and I started meeting with like the, you know, different faculty members and the deans of the zoology and biology departments, because I could sit there and talk with these guys in their language, and they were just blown away by me. And so it was this really, really wild experience. But my behavior, unfortunately, really held me back, because I think when I realized that I had this opportunity, and I realized that I had this intelligence and these components of, you know, of intellect and all this, I had to sabotage it, because that's just kind of what I did as a child into most of my adult life. It was my way of controlling it when I look back at it, sadly. And I would destroy opportunity. That way I knew that I would never have it.
Why?
Well, I know why now. In the moment, I didn't understand it for most of my life. But going back as a kid, because my whole life was ripped apart from me, it was my way of controlling the anxiety or the things from not happening. If I just knew that it was never going to happen, then that meant I was in control of it. And it couldn't be taken away from me like everything was. Okay. And so that was one of my coping mechanisms. And self-destructive behaviors like that, self-sabotaging, these things get worse and worse as we become adults. And you see it all the time, where people allow their fears and doubts to sabotage their goals, their dreams, all these different things. And so I was just like that. But as a kid, you know, I would be anything that was facilitated for me to help me, or I was coming into the capacity of higher learning, I sabotaged it. Because maybe I just didn't deserve it. I felt inside, because everything I thought I deserved was taken away from me. So,
did you think it was too good? And what I mean by that is, like, oftentimes I'll have these experiences in my own life where things are going so well, and I'm like, hold on.
Yeah.
There's got to be.
Wait a minute.
Yeah. There's got to be something.
There's
else.
a catch, or
right?
Yeah, like,
and
this can't be all too good to be true.
And there's almost a fraction of fear, but also a fraction of guilt that comes in, where maybe you're often growing up in these environments where, you know, you're not used to having nice things.
Yeah.
You're not used to having life go your way, and all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, like it's going my way.
Yeah. Well, exactly. I 100%
right?
support that. Like, there was definitely a lot of, I'm not good enough for this, or I'm not deserving of this. You know, and a lot of that stuff echoed, you know, behaviors that were put on me by my family or teachers or people in the community as a child. And that stuff molds you, right? And it stays with you whether we like it or not, you know, like a lot.
It's that body armor that you talk about.
Yeah, 100%. So, but when I was able to, you know, really go back, like I was speaking about earlier, and open up those things that happened to me or changed me, or, you know, I allowed to define me for so long and become the identity or the persona of Jason McLean. You know, you start to really realize that they're all interlinked and all very similar, and they have the same control devices, which are fear, doubt, and then self-sabotage. And then you add on top of it, you know, the fear of what people are going to say, or the fear of people, or what people, you know, will do, or whatever. Those are the what people are going to think or what people are going to say. Those are two of the biggest killers of dreams, goals, ambition in the world. And they're very common voices in most people's heads, unfortunately, right? And those stem from way back when you were a kid. And you may have had a parent that, you know, would say, like, don't jump off that rock, you're going to get hurt. You may have had a parent that said, jump off that rock, figure it out. If you get hurt, get up.
Yeah.
And you might have a person that was just like, don't go near that rock, it's too dangerous, and a bee's going to fly by you, and all these things. And so those people all develop differently in life, depending on the very small suggestions and advice they get from their leaders, which are going to be your parents or your grandparents or aunties, uncles, whatever, right? Or their brother, sister, whoever you spend the most time with. And and those continue on into our adulthood. And so one of my biggest campaigns is writing about that so I can help people understand that we have to go back to the child, and we have to go back to that child, and we have to find a way to help that child. And like I said, with me being that hero in those stories, I've now realized I've become that person in my life. I'm that person now that I wish could have been back there for me to save me. And everybody kind of needs to do that on their own level and in their own perspectives. I think if they're battling with mental health challenges or mental illness or different things, because and one thing I want to say too is that when we say mental health, for some reason, there's still a very negative connotation with it. And mental health is a beautiful thing, because mental health and physical health are very similar. If we take care of ourselves mentally, and we have mental fitness and mental self-defense, and we are, feeding our minds positive things and good things and healthy things, we're going to do a lot better. And if we have positive habits that, facilitate positive results in our life, we're going to be better off than if we were devouring a bunch of negative content and all that kind of stuff, right? And so when we talk about mental health, so many people still will be like, oh, whoa, I don't want to, and I speak about it. I go into organizations and I go into workplaces and schools, and I do presentations and workshops on mental health. And one of the first things I always say is like, why are we still in 2025 thinking mental health is that's a bad terminology? Like mental illness, that sounds a little bit, and I guess, it comes back from slangs from, decades before of, you're mental or a mental hospital or, like all these different things. But, the state of our mental health, it can be optimal. Like I have an incredible state of mental health now. I've had to work my ass off for it for years and develop strategies and activities and exercises, and had millions of failures for my, one or two successes, right? And maybe not millions, but definitely hundreds. And so, it does require work to have that optimal state of mental health. But I just wanted to state that because, I still find there's that stigma or dogma around mental health, and
I'm really glad that you brought that up, because while listening to your stories, and I've been contemplating these two ideas that I've heard, and it's a great author that I follow, is Simon Sinek. And he always talks about the two concepts of mental health and mental fitness, and the similarities, but also the differences between them.
Right.
And so you're right. Mental health often has that stigma of, if this person's feeling sad, oh, they're depressed.
Right.
If the person's, a little nervous, oh, anxious, anxiety.
Yeah, 100%.
Whereas he often defines mental fitness, the practice of feeling the feelings, right?
Yeah.
Of being able to sit in the mud of, okay, yeah, I'm feeling, just like you go to the gym to grow your muscles, you have to do the repetitions 100%. to rip the fibers in your muscles and feed them good protein to grow. Just like mental fitness, you have to be able to sit in the emotions, right?
Yeah.
To really go. So question for you would be, yes, mental health is a lifelong battle, and that often we can overcome. Do you think just sitting in the mud allows you to overcome the mental health issue?
No. I think there's awareness, right? And that's what that is. That's a state of awareness. I think sitting in anything long enough, you become complacent, right? So I think there always has to be an action applied to whatever we're doing. So awareness is a great thing. It's the step in the right direction. It's when we become self-aware of what is conflicting or disconnecting in our lives that's causing compromise, right, with the state of our mental health. And I think there's a beautiful position of, like you said, being able to sit in those emotions or thoughts and understanding and comprehending and learning as much as you can from them.
Okay.
However, if we don't apply an action to that, or, like an action plan, like what are we going to do once we know this stuff? What happens? Well, you're just sitting still. And when you sit still, you're not moving forward. And if you're not moving forward, you're not creating momentum. And if you're not creating momentum, well, then you're not pursuing purpose. And so without purpose, I find things are very empty. And so if we sat there long enough, the purpose of learning and all that starts to fade. And then now we're just sitting in mud. But if we were to now apply that action to the next step, we're creating a purpose. That purpose gives us drive. That purpose gives us the goals. That purpose gives us accomplishment once we've done it. Boosts our mood, makes us feel better, and we feel, smarter and more substantiated. And now we go on to the next thing. So I think there's value always in sitting or emancipating into something and getting the understanding and awareness from it. But we always have to apply an action, in my opinion. I mean, I don't know everything. Yeah. This is by speaking from my experience and from, the people I've coached or the people I've helped or the people I talk to or thousands of people that I've had conversations with over the last years. It's always valuable to continue with that purpose. We have to attach meaning to something with action, and that is purpose.
Right. And while I was listening to your podcast that you've been on before, there was this story about you having written all over your walls your insecurities.
Yes.
Right. And you sat in the mud through the COVID period.
Yes.
Of like figuring out, okay, like this is, like you said, maybe I'm feeling this fear. You went down that trail. You fell into that rabbit hole of finding out why.
Yes.
When you figured out the why, what was the next step of finding the action? Like you understood that you were scared maybe because this bully tripped you in floor hockey.
Sure.
Pam got hit in the face.
Yeah.
And so when
We'll find you.
when you figured that aspect out, what was the next step?
Well, so that is a really cool story. So when I started writing, I wrote out everything. So I was in an apartment, I had 2 bedrooms. And so I had all the walls just covered in, like I said, the insecurities, the feelings, the thoughts, what happened to me, all that. And I started to connect them all and realize that everything is tied together. Mm-hmm. And it came down to, like my fears and anger were all from the same things, things that I hated or I was, upset by, all the same thing. And so I sat on my floor and I remember it was my universe. It was the constellation of my mind all around me. And so I sat in like the mud there for days and just bringing it all in. And that's when I realized my action went from this point on was to write my first book, because it just started to all make sense to me, but beyond my own doing. It was almost like God or the universe, or the creator, or whatever you want to believe, started to sort of just patch it. And it was just like this really incredible, phenomenal feeling to realize that all this was connected. Just like everything in life is connected, basically. Mm-hmm. And so it was a very powerful, one of those aha moments where I just sat there and all of a sudden I was like, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write a book about all of this. I'm going to be as articulate and vulnerable so that people, when they read it, really understand the depths of depression and addiction and anxiety and to the point, like I attempted to take my life in 2019. And all this stuff happened after that because I had to fight for my life. It was either I finished the job or I start a new one. And so to start the new job was learn everything and become great and influence and impact other people's lives and change this world. And that's what I did. But in that moment, in that room, the action that came to it was write the book, go to the world, share the story, there's so many, the inner critic in me just lit up like fireworks. Oh, everyone's gonna make fun of you. No one's gonna read the book. Nobody's gonna care. Blow all this different, you'll fail and all the things I've heard my whole life. And I would just be like, you're right. And then I'd give up. And in this time I just was like, fuck no. I'm never listening to this again. And so it was a really powerful moment, much like riding the bicycle the first time, because I'd always relied on the negative things in my mind to tell me what to do. And this is one of the first really big moments where I overcame it and then went and pursued my dream. Mm-hmm. And I went from being a dreamer to actually living my dream out in the real world, into reality, which is such a powerful thing. And I'll tell you a really funny story. So in that room, it was a self-contained apartment, condo-style apartment. So I had a furnace in there. And so at the time, I haven't talked to anyone for days. This is sort of like another lockdown era after COVID, and the world is very weird. And I get a knock on my door, and I'm like, who could be at my door? And I look through the peephole, all sketchy. I'm like, and it's this dude in like a construction vest and a hat. So open the door and he's like, hey, I'm here to change your furnace filter and I have to do a reading on the furnace. And I was like, oh. And then all of a sudden it clicked. I'm like, oh, that's my paper room. That's my, that's my brain room. And I'm like, so I wasn't very comfortable with him going in there. And I'm like, I'll just take the filter. I can do the reading for you. He's like, no, man, I got to do it or whatever. I'm like, fine. So I'm trying to sort of prep him. I'm like, yeah, it's just, it's like my thought studio. I tell him as we're walking in there. And so we open the door. Oh, yeah, right. So he opens the door and he's like looking around and he's like,
What
this.
kind of fucking thoughts
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's all like, whoa.
Did you have yarn? Did you have yarn?
I didn't quite have yarn, but I had some stuff connecting. And
Okay.
so I'm like pretty impressive. Hey, and he looks around and he goes, no. No. He goes, you know what this reminds me of? And I'm like, tell me. He's like, when you're watching a movie and then they go down like the basement and it's like creepy and they find like that secret room behind like a wall and then the serial killer has like all those pictures and it's all connected by like the red yarn. And I just look at him like, get out. And then he wanted to take a selfie with me in there, right? He probably gets on his radio. He's like, hey, Chuck, you got to get up to 406, man. This guy's nuts, right? Like, he's got a thought studio, right? He's a killer. So, but it was a pretty funny moment for sure. But, it's the first time, when you're like, again, this is like another imaginary fantasy world that I was living in, like all these things I wrote out. Mm-hmm. And it was the first time that I had to allow someone into the reality of that, right? And it was very eye-opening. And I was nervous and kind of embarrassed, but at the same time, I wanted to defend it. And then he just totally made fun of me and made me feel like an ass. But that was probably the best thing that could have happened. So, but definitely a funny story.
Mm-hmm. You talk about like once you did that, you found like your purpose of like writing the book and your why. Mm-hmm. Do you think you found your purpose, or do you think you just channeled your feelings towards writing the book?
That's a good question. Maybe a bit of both. Purpose is such a incredible thing, and we often look at purpose in the long view in life. Like we have to find what is the purpose of life, and that's not a bad thing to pursue. However, we can create purpose and drive purpose daily with meaningful action and dedication and deliberate, ideas. And so I had already, had the contemplations of I wanted to, speak in front of people. I wanted to enlighten people and educate people. I wanted to help people and change this world. So I think, the initial brewings of that purpose were already, beginning to, to linger and sort of, consummate and get to a point. But that moment, I do remember it being sort of like where it just kind of all hit me like a dream. And then it's like, no, this is what I'm going to do. Gotcha. And then I started to actually create it in my mind in the future and see it and attach like feelings and like touch to it and create almost like turn it into a memory. And start so that my brain was already ready for it to happen. And when I started doing stuff like that, transcending thought into action or matter, a lot of people call it manifesting and stuff, but I think it's a little more powerful than that. These things started to unroll at a rate that was a little bit beyond me. I think there was definitely some push from the universe and a bit of a kick in the ass for me to really get it done. Mm-hmm. And so super powerful. But like I said, it's a bit of both. Like with the purpose was already brewing, and then that just was that aha moment, that defining moment where all of a sudden it was just like, you got to do this, man.
Yeah, because you were like, I'm going to prove all these haters wrong. But in a similar sense, even with that IQ story that you told, you were just like, I'm going to prove these people wrong.
Yeah.
And you just put all your effort towards that.
Yeah, I never really wanted to write it to prove anyone wrong necessarily. Okay. I wanted to prove more or less, to myself that I could do it. Mm-hmm. I think the only hater really I was trying to prove was the one inside of me, the one that held me back my whole life. Mm-hmm. So I really wanted to prove to myself I could do it. I wanted to prove to, I wanted to make like my dad and family proud, obviously, and I wanted to accomplish some good things in life. And in the beginning, there was definitely a bit of a vain pursuit. I looked at it at, I wanted to be this, famous author and, I'd walk into a restaurant and people would be like, "Oh, I read your book, Mr. McLean," or something like that. And that does happen, which is pretty cool. But, in the beginning was a little bit more of an egocentric driven
To the extreme,
thing.
right?
Yeah,
To the extreme.
and as it unraveled and the journey went on and on, that dissipated and it became more about the actual, the messaging and the things that were true to the movement that I was creating, right? This mental health movement of awareness and vulnerability, and especially for men becoming that voice, because so many of us are voiceless, talking about our feelings or talking about how we feel, or that we're exhausted, overwhelmed, depressed, beat down, whatever it is. And so yeah, it was just a very defining, powerful time.
And you chose to be vulnerable like that, like to, until this point in time, nobody really knows your whole life story.
Correct.
And you're taking the conscious effort of writing it down and like going back in the depths of your mind, finding these stories, rethinking these stories, and like your feelings around all those stories. And then did you look back and you're like, what did you say when you look back at all this? Like when you looked, like especially like after the point of like, having that rough childhood and like, being let go from your home and being homeless and things like that. Like,
Yeah.
Can you talk to me about that period, and what did you think about that period when you were rewriting it?
Well, it was tough. Like there was a lot of, when you resurface a lot of these emotions and the experiences that cause those emotions, you feel them again. And so that's often why we shelf it, right? And we pack it down. We never try to revisit it because we don't want to feel the things that we felt.
Why not?
And so, bringing them all back to life, to write them out and to explore them and learn from them, was really hard. There was a lot of tear-stained pages for sure. There's a lot of times where I broke down. There's things in that book that I wrote that I'd never told another person in my life about, some of the sexual abuse I went through. So there was definitely some moments that were, I had to stop. I just was like, this is too much. I'm overwhelmed. I need to go for a walk in nature. I need to, realign myself with the things that help me heal. But, that was part of the process as well. And that's what makes my writing so powerful, is that I didn't hide those things and I didn't alter them. I kept them as real as they were.
Yeah, they're authentic. They're real.
Yeah, and being genuine about that stuff is what's really resonated and really connected people to my books, because of the fact that, so many authors, and I'm not saying I'm better than any other author, but a lot of authors write in ways that are very sugar-coated, or they leave the parts out where it shows them maybe as the bad person or the true victim, and I didn't. I exposed everything about myself, and it was terrifying at times. And like I said, as going back, like the things I went through as a kid, and I was homeless a number of times as a teenager and lived on the streets for a couple of years, and then was in and out of street gangs and all kinds of stuff, and it just escalated into all kinds of more elaborate, challenging situations and problems in my life. And it resurfacing was, at the same time as it was challenging, it was very cathartic and healing for me, because again, it was all the things that had scarred me and destroyed me, and I had these wounds that were still infected in me that I had not healed. And by bringing them back and investigating them and operating on them, in my one book I call it The Autopsy, in One Drop of Water, my first book, because I literally wanted to understand what was killing me. And it almost killed me. My depression and addictions got to the point where I thought suicide was the answer. And so I performed this autopsy, and because I wanted to understand, where was I still sick? Where were the infections? Where, the things, and just like we talked about before, mental health and physical health, if you had a bad cut on your arm and you didn't treat it, well, what happened? Well, eventually it would get infected. And then that infection, what happens is it starts to spread. Now, if that infection gets into your blood and starts to get to other organs, or get a staph infection or different things, you can die. And our mental wounds are no different. And so I had these wounds that were killing me inside. They were infecting my body with stress and depression and anxiety and my brain and all these things, and they were affecting my life, and they were slowly killing me. And so when I was able to go in and pull all those experiences out that cause those. Again, I had to go back to the same thing I spoke about earlier, where it was look at the facts. The feelings, they're going to steer me all the wrong directions, right? And when I looked at the facts, I mean, I'm not in control of those, a lot of the things that happened to me, but I was keeping myself in control of those by punishing myself with them still. Yeah. And I had to learn to let go of that. I had to let that be, and what it was is what it was. It wasn't, and so, as I went through all of those situations that I talk about in both my books, there are some really, really painful experiences with that. But it also allowed the most beautiful healing sensations I've ever had in my life. Mm. And in my newest book, The Monarch Butterfly Effect, my dad died of cancer 3 years ago, coming up actually next week. And I wrote about him dying because it was such a huge, devastating experience in my life. My dad was my guy. And in The Monarch Butterfly Effect, my second book, I talk about going through that, and then 9 months later, I was in a motorcycle accident where I should have died. They prepped me to be paralyzed. I ended up walking out of that hospital after some time on my own. And so I went through these, within a very short time, 2 very, very hard situations. And, the book that I wrote about, what I wrote about was staying true to all the core values, principles, strategies, and the battle plan I created for myself from One Drop of Water, and provided like a roadmap for other people that could do the same. And in that, when I wrote about my dad, that was the last chapter I wrote because it was so hard. I was fighting it, and I didn't want to write it because I didn't want to face it, because it also was closure. It also meant that I had to really, truly accept that my father had passed on and he was no longer alive. Because when people die, I don't know if you've had someone you love die, but it's often we kind of keep them alive in our mind without really fully accepting they're gone. And when I wrote about it, it was like that closure of that relationship with my father, where he is dead. And so I didn't want to do it, and I put it off, and I put it off, and I put it off. And I finally wrote it, and it was so powerful and so emotional, and just, it ripped me apart. Like, it literally destroyed me. But at the same time, right after I was destroyed, I was rebuilt with so much strength. And so the reason I say that, the message that's important here is, from your original question, is revisiting the things, if we do it in a way that we want to learn from it and create lesson from it, so that we become wise from it and can understand how to now make the change that's going to improve our life from those things. That's what you have to do. And it is scary, and it hurts, and it sucks. But on the other side of it is this beautiful healing process that begins. And when we start to heal, we grow. And when we grow, we become stronger. When we become stronger, we can take on more. And then the more strength we have, the more peace we have in our life, and we can offer that to other people, right? So that's the lesson there that I really wanted to share.
Mm-hmm. 2 questions for you. I'll start with one, and I apologize if I make any assumptions.
Sure.
But from listening to your story and your other podcasts, you had a rough childhood.
Yes.
And a lot of that probably stemmed from abusive father, alcoholism, right? And yet a lot of people would use that and say, I don't care about my father. He was probably the root cause of my mental health problems. Mm-hmm. Why was he so important to you?
Well, growing up, my mom and dad split when I was pretty young, and I chose to live with my dad. My sister lived with my mom. And so my dad had a really tough time with alcohol. He was a horrible alcoholic, horrible. And, he rode a Harley and hung out with bikers, and he tried to maintain his jobs and different things. And so there was a lot of difficulty and problems in the home. And so I would visit my mom on the weekends. And there were some times when, flip-flop, maybe I'd go live with my mom for a bit if my dad was going through a really hard time or whatever. But, he got sober when I was 11 years old. And there was part of me that resented him for it, because he had met his wife, my stepmom, Carol. Mm-hmm. and got sober because he wanted to be with her. And she said, I'm not going to be with you if you drink. You're a horrible drunk. You're not the same person. I don't want to be anywhere remotely, close to that person. And so he quit drinking. And I remember watching my dad lie on the floor, vomiting and having shakes. My dad drank every day. Like, he would drink, 6 beers on the way home from work. I'd watch him chug a 2-6 of whiskey, like the bubbles going, and that was before he went out, to go play hockey or whatever, it was just like wild. And so, like, my dad physically was like deconstructing, going through withdrawal from alcohol. And it was a really scary time. And then he got better. And there's part of me that kind of resented it, but part of me that also was really proud of him. He would go to Sergeant Park Pool, and back then they had the track was underground under the pool. So I would watch him run, and and he'd run laps, and that was kind of his thing to get through, like when he would start having cravings for drinking, and I got to cheer him on and be part of that. And as I got older, I started to really lose control of my life, and I was just, I was full throttle out of control. Like,
How so?
like I was drinking, doing drugs, fighting, getting arrested, running away, everything bad you could probably think of, I started doing on the regular. And so, my dad did his best with that, and eventually got to the point I was seeing this child therapist who told my parents to no longer allow me back in the house if I was in one of those volatile states. I was 14, 15 years old, so they wouldn't. So I'd go back to the streets. And so I kind of had this really tough relationship with my dad throughout most of that time. And when I got into my 20s, I was still very tumultuous in my lifestyle choices. And, I was in and out of gangs, and then got into more of the biker life, and was hanging around all the wrong people and doing all the wrong things. And, my dad understood that lifestyle. So there was a bond with that. He didn't respect it or didn't want that for me, but, he didn't hold a lot of judgment and would talk to me openly about things. And so we became really good friends over the years. And there are times when I wanted to write him off for sure. And just like you kind of said, be like, like all these horrible things, like whatever. But at the same time, he just kind of was my superhero, and was my mentor. And I credit him for a lot of the things I am now, or because of things he taught me. And my dad instilled this incredible love of nature with me. It was wild. He loved camping, and he loved gardening, and he loved being outside and going on nature walks and animals. And he instilled this, this passion for with me that now I share with the kids I work with and do all these things. And so there's been these incredible teachable moments that he passed on to me without making it as an obvious lesson, And so I hold all the respect for him, and I miss him every day, and I love him, and it's still sad. Like, him and I, we love the Jets, and every Jets game, I still pick up my phone to call my dad to make sure he's going to watch it or whatever, and stuff like that. So I guess there's part of me that maybe like the superhero that decided to save the bullies, the superhero kid fantasy of me wanted to save my dad too. Because I know my dad was hurt. I know a lot of things. Obviously, my dad was not healthy if he was treating himself like that. And so I had empathy and sympathy for him. I didn't really understand it as a kid because we don't really know how to name those feelings or emotions when we're that young. But powerful man, and taught me all the good things about being a man. So
to be on the streets at like 14, 15, like, not being welcome back in your own house, like, I don't know what that feels like, nor do I ever.
Terrifying. Terrifying, man.
Like, can you break down like sleeping at Pan Am Pool?
Well, Pan Am Pool was was a good spot. So yeah. But so what would happen is, the good nights were where I could talk to a friend or stay over. But usually what I'd end up doing then was, like, as soon as someone was asleep, I'd go steal things that I could sell on the streets or whatever. So I'd have food or whatever. And, I'd burn a lot of bridges for sure. But I slept in parked cars. I slept in community clubs. I slept in half-built houses. Anywhere I could find shelter.
For how long? Like a while?
I was on the streets off and on for 2 years, from when I was 14 till I was about 16-ish.
Okay.
And then I was on the streets again later in life as an adult. I lived in a van and all these different things. But so Pan Am Pool, I used to skateboard there. They had these like couple sets of stairs and a handrail, so we used to like do our cool tricks there. And so I knew it quite well, and I always swam there and stuff. And so, and it was always warm, right? If you ever go into Pan Am Pool, it's like a tropical feel in there. It's very hot and humid. You smell the chlorine, and I really like that. And so I was in there trying to steal like things from the vending machines, like some chips or whatever, chocolate bars to eat. And I noticed they were closing everything down, and I was like, "There's no one here." And so I tucked under a set of stairs, like these stairs coming down. They're like, it's concrete. Everything's concrete in there. And so like there's these things, and then there's like a wedge coming down, and then almost like a little tiny hidden crawl space between like where the stairs would turn. Okay. And so I just set up camp in there one night, and it worked. And so I'd do it, slept there, and it wasn't the best sleep, but I was able to I didn't have to worry about people hurting me. I didn't have to worry about, rain or snow or cops waking me up. And then so I went about my business, and I went back there the next day, and same sort of thing, because you could go into, there's a way I could sneak into Pan Am Pool without paying. And then so I got in there, and same thing, I went in there. So I ended up doing that for a number of nights. And then one night when I went to the spot where I always slept, there was a couple bags of chips and a couple chocolate bars there. And I was like, wait a minute, what? And I get there was a Filipino man that was the overnight cleaner, and I guess he had noticed me, and so he started leaving me food there. Wow. So it was really cool. And so that lasted almost 2 weeks. And then I got caught sneaking in, and they're like, you're under arrest if we catch you in here again, and blah, blah. I'm like, fair. It was a good run. I get it, so... but it was really cool, and it just shows you, the power of kind people, that they're, this guy could have called the cops on me or woke me up and kicked me out. And instead, here he is throwing me a bit of...
You ever talked to him?
I never talked to him. Yeah, I never talked to him. I knew who he was. I gave him a nod one time, and he kind of gave me a bit of a smile and pretended not really to notice me. But I guess he probably had kids and was like, It was, he felt my misfortune for sure, and was really good. I had there's a Salisbury house that used to be open 24 hours in Tuxedo Mall, and there was an old lady there named Sheila, and she was kind of famous. She was really bitchy and kind of stubborn and all these things, but she was very kind. And she would always let me come there, and she would give me a warm hot chocolate and let me have a piece of wafer pie, and she would let me sleep, basically stay in there all night. And so there's these little pockets of really kind people that helped me along the way, that definitely, felt some things, had compassion. There's also a lot of people that did not, sadly. And, you get caught somewhere and people are like, get out. And, they don't realize you're just a little kid. And obviously, you don't want to be there, right? But you're trying to survive, right? And survival on the streets is very scary. Like, I can only imagine what it'd be like now with the way drugs are in our city. But being downtown primarily, as a homeless kid, sleeping in parkades, like I was exposed to a lot of scary stuff, a lot of very weird and awkward situations, some very predatory men for sure, getting chased by older kids or gangs and stuff. And terrifying moments. I got the living shit kicked out of me a number of times by the cops, by kids, by gangs and stuff like that. And so, I didn't have a lot, and when everything you have is kind of on you and that gets taken from you, it's violating and demeaning, and you can't protect yourself, right? It's just humiliating. So I carried a lot of hate towards a lot of things after that, for sure. I was very bitter and jaded against life, for sure. So
how'd you get out of that?
I eventually made a contract to go back to school and live with my parents. And so I did the best I could with that. And so I did. And but I again, I started, I was acting out at school all the time and putting on a show, and I liked the attention of being the bad kid. And at that time, I was kind of in and out of, some street gang stuff. And so I had some false bravado and a lot of the school jocks and the, like all the hockey player and the guys that were probably way tougher than I thought I was, didn't really care for that much. And so I got myself into a number of situations with that. And so, high school was very uncomfortable for me. I was always different. But at the same time, I had lots of people that cared about me and wanted to help me. They knew I was going through the challenges that I faced. So,
yeah. So for someone who doesn't understand or maybe never got to experience the depths of depression, can you articulate what that feeling is like?
I can. Imagine you are all by yourself and you are in a hole that is about 10 feet deep. And you are inside that hole. And so you can see out and you can see the light and you can see that life is there, but you can't quite find your way out of that hole. And every day a little bit of that dirt surrounding the hole starts to fall in and starts to slowly, you're realizing you're slowly getting buried alive. And that if you probably screamed for help, someone would come help you, but you're too ashamed to do that. And that's what depression does, is it creates a very delusional state of mind, where you become a burden, where you become worthless, where you become hopeless. And it, if not treated properly, I'm not necessarily saying medication, if you're not getting sunlight and exercise and movement and healthy foods and nature and all these things that can naturally remedy depression, it gets worse and worse. And so depression, being a mental health challenge, turns into a mental illness, because it's that, like I was talking about earlier, it's the wounds that are infected now, and that infection is spreading and it causes disease. And depression is a disease of the mind, not the brain, but the mind. And the mind is a conscious state of our thoughts, emotions, and the things that happen to us in our life. And so we can get very trapped in that moment, and it paralyzes us. And so we begin to live in our past instead of being able to be where we are right now or forecast what's going to happen in the future. And if we do any forecasting, it's going to be negative, because we're basing it off of all of our past failures and pains and things that's where depression lives. So you're in this pit, this hole, and it's soil and everything is starting to bury on you slowly. Not enough that you're in a panic, but enough that you realize that it's going to at one point bury you alive. And instead of screaming for help because you don't want to burden other people, or you're too embarrassed, or your pride is too big, you stay in that hole. And slowly that light starts to become smaller and smaller, because the opening of that hole gets smaller and smaller. And you are stuck in it because more and more of the earth around you has grown. And so you become almost paralyzed or fixated in this hole. And the whole time you're in it, you want to scream, you want to get out, but you don't believe that you should, because you don't believe you're good enough to. You don't believe that what's on the other side of that, if you get out of there, is going to be any better. And that's what depression does, is it suffocates hope, and it suffocates reality, and it suffocates light. And it gets to a point, if we don't treat it and we don't start doing things that can change it and alter, which is through new positive habits and routines and ideas and actions and thoughts and perspectives, it closes so much that you cannot see out. And now you're trapped in that hole. And now you're at a point where you can't get out. And so when you know that you're trapped in something, there's only really two options. There's give into it and just allow time to slow burn away, and you become whatever happens, or you want to end it. And that's sadly, 92% of all suicides are people with depression. another statistic that, again, almost 90% of men with depression have an alcohol addiction or a drug addiction because they hold hands, they're best friends, because that's our self-medication, right? But so when you're in a true state of depression, and like my last episode with depression lasted 2 years. So that hole started, as big as this room, and I could move around in it, and it was kind of comfortable. So it wasn't bad, but by the time I got to where I put a gun in my mouth and decided that I was going to blow my brains out, because that made sense. That's how, like, when I look back at it now, I'm like, it sounds so insane that I honestly believed that made sense. But that's what, if we don't treat depression, that is the final result of it, is that it can kill you through suicide, or, drinking yourself to death, or all these different things. So when that, like I said, when that hole finally closes in, you're trapped, and you have one way out. And the only way out at that point for me was to end it. And to be very clear, I'm terrified of death. I don't want to die. But I wanted to end the pain that I was feeling. I wanted to end the suffering, the delusions, the loneliness. And what's really strange when I look back on that time, like, I can still feel all those feelings, and it can bring me to tears some days, is, like I said, how intoxicating that delusion became, because I totally was believing in it more than reality at that point. But it's just testament to, if we think the same things over and over, mental repetition can be really positive if we're doing it for positive things, but it can be absolutely life-ending, like it was in my case, if we're doing it for negative. And that's what I was doing. I was just enumerating, I'm worthless, I'm hopeless, everything I do, I screw up, all I do is hurt people, I'm useless, I have no purpose. Over and over again, you tell yourself that 150,000 times a day for a year, well, good luck, right? So, you keep yourself in that hole because of that. And that's what depression does, is it plays that trick in our mind. And so, when I came on the other side of, obviously, the gun jammed, I'm here, I didn't die, and I was given an opportunity to share this story, which is incredibly remarkable and powerful, and then add my life lessons to it, because I really wanted to be able to tell people, like, from my experience, like, you can learn from this. I don't want anyone else to go to that hole and watch it slowly fill in around you and get buried alive. And so, in my books, I really talk about the things we can do as individuals in our lives to make sure that doesn't happen. Because I don't want anyone to ever feel that. It is fucking horrifying, the worst. And there's nights where I have moments where I think about that, and I'm like, what if that gun didn't jam? And I wake up and I scream, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm like, that really happened, but that is what mental illness can do to a person. Mental health is different than mental illness. We all have health. But when our health deteriorates, that's when sickness comes in, and that's when disease comes in. Severe anxiety becomes crippling. That is a disease of the mind. So is depression. There's eating disorders. There's all these different things, these mental illnesses that can really take over the mind and warp your sense of reality, right? And that's, I'm living proof of it. But I'm also living proof that you can take that back with the right mental exercises and, creating stability through habits and routine and all these positive things. And the biggest thing is mindset, and setting your mind into a positive state constantly through positive repetition.
Walk me through the process of what was going on in your brain when you made the choice of, I'm getting this gun, I'm putting it in my mouth, and I'm pulling the trigger.
Did you know you were in the hole?
Oh, yeah, I did. There are a lot of times when I wish I could have screamed for help. I had a lot of friends message me after. They had no idea until they read my book, or until they started seeing all my stuff all over social media when it blew up. And they were mad at me. They're like, why did you not reach out to me? And I'm like, I couldn't. My pride, my ego was still too big and inflamed at that time. I couldn't allow people to see me like that. And there's an act of self-preservation, I think, too, that I wanted. It was just bizarre. But I knew I was in the hole, but I still wouldn't call out. But step by step, it went like this. So I started drinking. The day that I attempted to take my life was November 19th, 2019. And I had been fantasizing about it solid probably 1,000 times a day for over a month. It got so sick, I had planned out my funeral. I had planned out the music I wanted to play. I had envisioned who was sitting in the front row and what they were saying about me. I was sick. Like it was beyond measure, but I just, because again, I was so consumed by it, that's all I thought about. And so on the Friday before I started drinking heavy and started doing cocaine and taking pills and anything, I just was trying to basically destroy my brain. And I did that for about 3 days. I didn't eat. I don't remember drinking water. I polished off a number of bottles, way too much cocaine, painkillers, whatever. And I had told myself at 9:45 a.m. on November 19th, because for some reason that made sense to me, I was going to end my life. And so I was sitting there, and I was in my living room in my apartment, and I remember there was broken bottles, that I drank and just thrown. It was completely dark. I had covered everything that had lights on it and closed the blinds, and I was sitting there, and I had some papers in front of me that I had written out letters, or some were nice letters, or some were very mean letters to people. All different things. In very intoxicated state. I shared one of those letters I wrote in my last book, The Monarch Butterfly Effect, just for some context on how delusional, again, people can get. I had a brand new firearm, full loaded clip, never been fired before, and at 9:45, I was crying, I remember, and talking to myself out loud, and just, I knew it was the end. And I remember saying, when the next tear left my face, when that drop hit the ground, I would pull the trigger, and I would disengage the safety, and I put the gun in my mouth, and I remember saying goodbye in my mind, and I screamed as loud as I could, but it was silent. No noise came out. And then I pulled the trigger, and that was it. So I thought, and everything went dark in my mind. And I talk about this experience in One Drop of Water. I had this sensation where time is this mysterious thing. Sometimes time can feel this much could feel like a lifetime, and a lifetime can feel like this. Mm-hmm. And I was in this suspended state of animation, perhaps. I don't know. I personally think my brain shut down. The physical organs shut down because it was about to die, it thought, so it would prep what it could do to save itself. But my consciousness stayed alive. And I was in this really dark, weird abyss that was cold like outer space and empty. And this weird thing kind of happened where I saw this little girl come out of this flickering light, and this little girl happened to be my best friend's daughter, and she was dancing around me and started asking me these really simple questions in my mind that were like, "What are you doing?" And I couldn't answer her, and then she's like, "Where are you going?" And I just remember being like so stricken by this moment. And when she asked me that, and she said something to me, and it just kicked me back in. And all of a sudden I saw like all these crazy visions, and then just like a car starting, I felt like my brain kicked back on, and then I looked around in complete shock, and I was alive. And I looked at my hand, and I had dropped the gun, and then I looked behind me like this, and the wall was clean. So I was like, what is going on? And then I literally was in shock, and I was angry at first because I failed. And failure was one of the biggest driving one of the biggest drivers for my depression. I had failed at everything in my life. I'd failed myself, failed in relationships, failed at jobs, I had fucked up everything I had done constantly. That's why I had a triple black belt in failure. Like I was a grandmaster of failure. And then for me to fail at this one thing, I just was like, what an ironic slap in the face from the universe or God or whatever you want to call it. And I was really mad. And then in that moment, I had this like choice. Do I do it again? And I was terrified. And I didn't. And I remember lying down. I walked to my bathroom and I lied down on the floor in there in the fetal position, and I cried for hours because I started to feel all the pain I would have caused my family, my dad, my mom, my stepmom, my sisters, their kids, all my friends. And I felt that pain. And it just crippled me. And I cried until I passed out, and I slept for probably a day because I'd been up for so long on drugs. And then when I woke up, I felt awful from everything I'd done to try and, destroy my brain, basically. And, but when I woke up, I said, never again. And I wrote a letter to myself that day, promising myself that I would never, ever, ever allow myself to give up again. And I still have that letter. So powerful stuff. I had been listening to these demons in my mind for so long, these depression demons that, I was subscribing to and allowing to run my thoughts. And it, whether it was, like you said, the act of faith, or it was a divine intervention, whatever it was, it gave me just a pinhole of clarity. And I was able to use that and be like, I just was flooded with fear, with shame, with guilt, with doubt, with so many things. And even maybe that anger is what maybe kind of kick-started it. And I didn't have the parts to do it again. Because that failure, if it wouldn't have happened, I wouldn't be sitting here with you, amazing people, talking today. But it also changed my perspective on failure, because now I was able to understand that these are all lessons just waiting for me to learn from. And like, I don't believe in failure anymore. I don't think it exists in my life. I don't allow it to, because failure is just a negative word that people tie onto something when they haven't given it their all, or recalibrated, or reconstructed a plan to get something done. And so failure to me from my past became the best teacher, because it exposed all these opportunities for me to learn from what happened or what didn't happen, or what could I do better. And I was able to catalog all those things into my writing, and not only offer it to other people, but me writing those books, I wrote both those books for me first. I wrote these books for their self-help guiding books for me. And that's what's made them so successful to help other people, is because I didn't write them with the mind of like, oh, I'm going to, attack this genre and I'm going to get them to love this book and it's going to help them. No, I wrote this book to help me. And that's what it did. And so, to your point though, failure is the greatest teacher. It truly is. But you have to be able to put yourself into that perspective to understand that. So many people will be stuck on this loop that failure, I failed, and then they give up. But failure is offering you the experience to learn more about yourself and what can you do better, or what could you do differently, or, it doesn't always have to be better. Sometimes it's just what you got to do differently, or do you have to do it more often, or whatever it is. But there's always something on the other side of whatever we failed at to teach us. And so that moment, obviously, being the greatest failure of my life, has completely shifted, the dynamics on how I view failure.
Do you ever think about the vision that you have of that little girl as you sat there after the gun jam? Like,
I do. I see her all the time.
Right.
So I dedicated a chapter to her. Her name's Brooklyn. And so the chapter in One Drop of Water is called Brooklyn the Dancing Unicorn. And so at the time she was like maybe 3 or 4 years old. And so now she's older. And so she knows I've written a book about her, but it's not, she's too young to read it. And she knows she's played a very valuable part in my life. So it's powerful and emotional when I see her, but for sure, I think about it. It's just because I want to understand everything. I can't stop wanting to learn, and I want to understand things, right? And so, but that's kind of one of those things I can explain it and I can learn from it, but will I ever truly know what it was? I don't. Was it me? Was it my mind? Was it again divine intervention? Was it these different things, right? Was it the universe? Is it this cosmetic, the energy of the cosmos? I don't know.
Would you ever consider it like maybe in a very indirect way being your inner child speaking to you?
It could be. Yeah, I thought about that. I thought about, was it such a harmless image that I would allow it into my subconscious to redirect me in that moment, right? Like, because it's someone unassuming and it's not like it's my daughter, so it's like, would that, and it's someone, someone one of my best friends. So, was it like a trick basically of my subconscious getting me to come back to where I needed to be? I've thought about it in depth, right? So the thing with this one is I'll never truly know, which is okay. But it's one of those, mystifying moments, right? But also a very defining one.
I've been thinking of this while you've been telling your story. Do you think you spoke about that hole that you're in?
Yes.
And you were able to get yourself out of that. But do you think that you were there's nothing you had to go through that to get out of it? Could there have been anything somebody else would have said to you that would have helped you out of that? Or did you have to get to that point to realize it on your own?
That's a great question. Because the state I was in, my perspectives were very warped. And I was very insecure, and I cared way too much about what people would think about me. And so I was too embarrassed to ask for help. And all I needed was one person to come over, put their arm there, and pull me out.
Would you have taken it?
No. At the time, I would not have. Do I teach people and guide people now to accept that? I do. But not everybody is willing to do that, especially because we become very self-victimized in a state of depression. And we like to subscribe to that pity party sort of thing where we show up every day and we get addicted to the negative dopamine hits of misery. And I was definitely there. So there's part of me that were there people around that wanted to try and help me back then? Some. Yeah. I was a great actor and I hid it from a lot of people. Some of the people I was closer with had noticed a lot of my jokes were about killing myself. They had gone from me making really funny, witty jokes to, I'll probably just get hit by a car tomorrow anyway, or just, like these subtle sort of tells that things were not good. And I started to pull away from social interaction and become a more reclusive. So there were some signs, and I had a few people reach out a little bit, but people also know me, and I've always been very set in my ways. So, but in those moments, I don't know if I would. I know I wouldn't have accepted it, and that's scary because now, if I was in that situation, 1,000,000% would I accept it.
Yeah, but you know that.
I know that now, and I had never, I've been battling depression on and off throughout my life. And depression comes from a disconnection from ourselves. Depression comes when we're not doing the things that make us happy. It's very simple. People try to elaborate and make it so much more complex than that and all these things. Depression is basically broken down into when we're disconnected from ourselves, we don't know who we are, we become lonely, we get depressed. And when we're not doing the things that make us happy, we're doing things that aren't authentic or genuine. And so, of course, you're going to get broken down eventually and not be happy in life. And so, but I had battled that in and out, at times, and it would last maybe, a week or 2 weeks. But this was, I had wrapped myself in it like a blanket and made my bed, so I was all in. And that's kind of how I've always lived my life. And when, like I said, if people most people won't get as deep as I went. Most people will get help or find a way, or someone will shake them out of it. I was also in a state where I was isolated. COVID was going on, and so I couldn't see family, and so there's a lot of elements that made it worse, but also in my healing made it better because I was forced to be alone and actually face all these things. But most people that get depressed aren't going to go as extreme as I did, and I know that. But that doesn't change the direction of my message to anybody, because anybody also could. All it takes is one step, and then you fall in that hole, right? So the goal for me is to get people to stop them before they even see the hole, right? Because there's signs, there's things, and when we can change our behaviors and our habits and our routines and how we see things and how we feel things, the biggest thing I try to teach people is this: if you're going to allow your emotions to control your thoughts, you're fucked. You're not gonna win. But if you can train yourself to teach your thoughts to control your emotions, well, then you will be in a state of perpetual control. And not in a control like where we have to control from our ego, but control as in you can dictate the situation. You're responsive instead of reactive in your approach to anything. And so I was very reactive at that time, and I was not ready to allow anyone or anything to take me off course.
Why do you think that is the case now with a lot of men's mental health in particularly? We often never reach out.
Mm-hmm.
We never want to show that vulnerability of ourselves.
Right.
And I think a lot of that has attested from society constantly putting the pressure on men to be, we're men.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
Like that idea of you got to be strong, can't cry, got to tough it out. That's just what men do.
Yep. Pride, all those things. Yeah, absolutely. So boys don't cry, right? So I'll go back to my childhood, playing hockey, minus 29 outside, outdoor rink, and my dad tying up my skates so tight that it hurt because my feet were frozen. And I was crying, saying to my dad, I don't want to go back out there. I'm freezing. And he said, you get the fuck back out there and you skate your ass off until you warm up. Stop crying. Okay? What do? Me and about 3 other boys that all have frozen tears on our face. We're back out on the ice, can't feel our feet, and we're miserable and we're pissed off, and we get out there and we finish the practice. Back then, the world wasn't quite as kind as it is now with weather. Nowadays probably a minus 25 or something with a wind chill. They're like, it's canceled. Not on my generation. And so from a very young age, because our fathers and fathers, it's been this thing passed down where you don't show you're weak. You know what? If you're having a bad day, you just work harder, right? And, all these things. And so that's great. But unfortunately, what that leads to is 76% of all suicides in Canada are men. 76% of all suicides. On average, there are about 5,000 suicides that they record in Canada a year. So 75% of those are men. In the world, it's around the same average, around 73%. Excuse me. There's on average between 1 million and 2 million suicides a year. So one person every 23 seconds. And being 70% of that being men. And the result of that is because men continually push everything down and don't deal with their emotions. And what they do also is they don't heal and they don't grow. And so we're taught from a very young age through industries like movies and TV shows, you got to be a tough guy. The guy that doesn't show emotion wins. You work harder. If you show emotion, you'll never be a millionaire. You got to be this. You got to have 15 side hustles, and you got to, keep this, and this. And never once do they ever talk about, well, you should also learn how to understand your thoughts, your emotions, how your mind works. You should probably explore the things that happened to you as a child so that you can gain strength and knowledge so you can be a better father, so you don't do the same thing to your kids. These things aren't ever really talked about. And so as men, and my job as a man, I facilitate like these men's mental health retreats, and I'll tell you how it always works. We start early in the forest in the morning, and almost every guy starts like this, right? And they want to tell you, yeah, like very guarded. And, you know, some guys are like, you know, a lot of this. And by lunchtime, I've really helped, you know, through some group and solo therapy activities and different things. That guard's been brought down. And by halfway through the day, some of these guys are talking about things they've never talked about again because they feel safety in a group of other men that are like-minded. The challenge is that there aren't a lot of groups of men that are like-minded and want to share, you know, our feelings. I'll give you a perfect example. Imagine you're at a Jets game with like 4 of your buddies, right? And the Jets win, and you're like, awesome, man, let's go to Earl's after. It's gonna be fun. And then you're sitting at Earl's and, you know, you're having food and whatever. And, you know, everyone's talking about stuff. And then I said, you know what, guys, would be really fun right now? What if we went around and we talked about a few of the things that are really troubling us emotionally and see if we can inspire each other to be better, right? Exactly. Like we'd start laughing. Someone would probably throw a beer at me, whatever. But that's the reality. Yeah. But women can do that. Women can do that anytime. You know, they can do that at any point. They can talk about their emotions. And so, you know, men need to learn this. And men, the vulnerability has been imprinted in us, you know, like a computer program through generations of, you know, this very sort of bravado type masculinity. Well, in my opinion, the most powerful masculinity and true masculinity is being powerful but peaceful. And the only way you can be both of those things is you have to know what's in here. You have to know what's in here. And you can have all this and all this stuff, but if this and this isn't connected properly, then you don't have power and peace. You'll have one or the other, but you won't be able to use them together. And true masculinity to me is powerful and it is peaceful. It gives the power to be able to help other people that need it. It gives the power to be able to lead and facilitate a family. It gives, you know, the power to be a provider or all these different things. But that peaceful side also allows us to be able to be led and to be taken care of and to be vulnerable and to be all the things that make a human a human. But men have been somehow programmed to believe that we're not human anymore and that we're just supposed to be a machine, right? And, you know, you watch, like you put on a sad movie and, you know, you'll never see a group of guys watching a sad movie together, right? Because it just doesn't happen. But you could watch, you know, women will get together and watch a sad movie and they'll cry and they'll share these moments. And, you know, like if I don't really cry in a lot of movies, but for like certain movies about like mentally challenged people will really get to me. And there's a movie called Radio. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Super Cuba Gooding Jr. He plays someone that's, you know, got some mental challenges and he's a mascot and all these different things. And his mom dies in the movie. And so it's a really heartbreaking scene. And I remember years ago, I was sitting in my basement watching it and I'm bawling. And 2 of my buddies showed up to come pick me up because I was just like, they're out on their Harleys and we're going to go for a ride. And they come in and they're, you know, big, huge steroid tattooed dudes. And I'm down there, I'm like bawling and they're like, what's up? I'm like, oh, nothing. Bird flew in my eye from over there. There's a seagull in my house. You know, like this is so stupid, right? Like, what are you watching? I'm like, stupid movie. I don't even know what it's called. I think it's called Radio or something. Watched it 100 times. Yeah. You know, and it's so funny, right? But like, we mask our emotions. We mask our true selves, and we got to stop doing it because it's killing us, right? Like, I don't understand. So I get in front of people, and I get so many messages on social media from men, and you know they'll relate with stuff, and they'll be like, you know what, I was so close, I had the pills, I was gonna do it, and then I stopped because of my family, and then they always say the same thing to me after. You know what they say? I'm sorry for telling you this, and I get so mad at them, and I said, don't you ever apologize again. This moment should be celebrated. I am so fucking proud of you for sharing that with me, because you've probably never told anyone else that. Because men, we can't. But why can't we? And you probably would have never got to that moment if you would have talked to your brothers or your family or your friends and said like, man, I'm really struggling. I need some encouragement. I need some help. You know, just let's go for a drive. I don't care. Let's listen to gangster rap and not even talk for 2 hours, man. Like I just need someone. But we don't do that. And so I get in front of crowds of people, in front of men, I cry, I tell my stories, I laugh, I make jokes, but I showed them that you can be vulnerable, you can be emotional, you can be all these things because it's part of being human. And why the hell should we deprive ourselves and destroy ourselves and make ourselves sick? Because that's what we're doing by not doing these things. We can't live a beautiful, genuine, authentic life if we're not in touch with our emotions. And I'm not going to allow any more of society to dictate that to me. The same society that tells us we're all toxic masculinity as soon as we stand up for ourselves is the same society that's saying, why can't you be more in touch with your feelings? Like it's such a hypocritical approach to it from the world. So I say, fuck the world and just do what is going to be best for you in a way that doesn't, affect anyone negatively, right? And so the power of true masculinity, like I said, is that powerful, peaceful bond. And it's part of my mission to help other men understand that and achieve it.
Yeah, and I think to that extent, like you are 100% right. There's that balance of true masculinity comes from this definition that I saw on Instagram. It's the ability to cause destruction, but you tame it, right? You have they often talk about alpha male,
right?
Like alpha male, this person that walks in leadership, like you're the man. Yeah, okay, great.
Yeah.
You don't have that emotional side. So and I think the balance that you have is be powerful, but have that peaceful side.
Sure.
And I think a lot of the personal experiences that I've had is when you put guys in a situation where they're indirectly talking about their feelings. So have you ever had a moment where, let's say, you and a couple of buddies are building a fence?
Good.
And you're you know the process. You got to dig the boreholes. You got to lay out your posts, pour the concrete. And as a product, like this has happened with my dad. My dad is a very traditional man who doesn't often talk about his feelings. And whenever him and I will do some sort of yard work around the house, or because he's in the trades, or I go help him, there's that moment of dude, I've been really stressed. Dude, I lashed out because fuck, I don't know. I've just been overworked. And I think that's the moment where the ability to indirectly hold space for men is where that power of friendship and fatherhood and brotherhood comes in. Oftentimes we don't even know how to hold space for our friends. And I think, what would your recommendation be for that? How can I hold space for the brothers in my life that allows them to being open to be vulnerable?
Well, first of all, I think, and I commend you for wanting to do that, because there's many men that don't. But I think we just got to keep it simple. And you your friends, and I think it's pretty obvious when one of your friends is going through something. There's always the obvious things like a breakup or loss of job or sickness and all those things. But I check in with people all the time, and if it annoys them, I don't care. And that's something that we've kind of taken on almost like a burden, where it's like if we check in on someone because we care, we're burdening them. That's what we think, and it's so wrong, right? It's just backwards. So, I reach out to people, and I haven't heard from you a bit, man. I just wanted to let you know I'm thinking about you, and tell me, are things good? I don't ask them how are you and all that. Good. Tell me, how are things? What's going on? Are they good? Or how's your mental health? Ask them that question. That really screws with people. They're like, why are you asking that? What do you mean, right? Or they could be like, you'll be surprised. Someone might say, no, I'm not very good right now. It's really easy to ask the questions that just get those very open-ended, whatever answers, right? So you're okay? Yep. That's what I told everybody while I was sitting there with a gun beside my pillow, right? So I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. Totally fine. Just tired, just tired. So I told everybody, not feeling myself, I'm tired. And so we have to learn to sort of, get those questions that have a prompt to them that brings in a conversation.
How much of that is though, whenever you ask someone, dude, are you okay? How much is that on the other person to be vulnerable enough to be yeah, I'm not okay?
You're never going to get that answer, or very few times you're going to get the answer, oh yeah, I'm actually struggling.
It's true, but
and a lot of the reason for that is because, like, for example, if someone asks me, like, whatever, like if I'm feeling something, I often don't even know how to articulate that feeling.
Right.
I don't even know what that feeling, like I can't put a description on it. It's like,
why not? You sound like you can right now.
yeah, I can't, right.
So why can't you
Right.
then?
But like it's in the moment, I often need to do some sort of reflection to be able to realize, like you said, find that roadmap of like, why am I feeling that? Then I can put a label on it. But if someone asks me like in the moment of, what are you feeling? Like, I don't even fucking know. Like,
Right.
I don't even know how to articulate it.
100%.
It's also the side of like, yo, even if I'm going through something, I'll figure it out.
Well, I see, that's everything we've been taught, right?
Yeah.
That's my favorite saying for everything. And, I say it like, I'll figure it out. I always do.
Yeah.
I'll figure it out. I always do. Now, I use that in a really positive way now. But before, that was my deflection. You know what I mean? Don't worry, I'll just figure it out. I'll just figure it out. Leave me alone. But again, consistency is such a powerful tool. And consistency does something to someone eventually. If you're truly going through some stuff and you're having a hard time, if someone keeps asking you from a place of care, you're going to break eventually and be like, hey, fine, man. Yeah, I'm kind of having a tough time with this. And so be annoying, in the pursuit of it. And the thing is that we respond to a number of things. We respond to structure, we respond to consistency, and we respond to care. And if we're able to put all those things, all three of those components together in a message, it becomes pretty powerful. And you can say to someone like, look, man, I feel like something's going on with you. So you know what? I'll give you some space, think about it, but I'm going to come pick you up tomorrow. I put myself in a situation where I don't allow them to often tell me or to deflect me. I'm going to do this. I'm like, it doesn't matter. I'll be at your house. See you tomorrow. And then, and then get them out of the place where they're probably stuck in, that is part of the environment that's causing some of the situation. And like I said, you know what, man, like a car ride or just going for coffee, or I don't drink booze, but like lots of people go for drinks, whatever, doing something like that, and just being honest and open. And often when you lead from a place of like, you know what, I've been kind of having some challenges with this myself. And you're able to lead that conversation from that place where now you're opening it up and you have that trust and that rapport with someone, and they're going, well, we have a commonality now. You know what, I'm going through this too. Or like, man, I've been drinking way too much lately. I got to slow down. Like I need someone to kind of be my support network here. And then empowering that person that you're trying to help, put them into a position of power, that will often bring that conversation to life as well. And this is what I found from experience. I mean, don't get me wrong, for every 100 that have worked, 1,000 of them have not, right? So, but that's what I'm talking about that consistency and structure. If we take the same approach and we're consistent about it and we keep doing it, eventually we're going to get to that point with that person that they have no choice. They're going to open up.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point of you saying like, hey, I'm picking you up and we're going on this drive. Have you ever had that experience of when, let's say like a parent passes away or something?
Yeah.
You're like, oh, sorry for, like, my condolences. Let me know if you need something.
Yeah.
That I often heard that phrase of like, you're putting that burden on them.
Yeah, you are.
You're telling them, hey, like you fucking let me know.
Yeah, I know you're just grieving and your heart's broken. But if you need anything, you can reach out to me and let me know.
Exactly.
Right? So yeah, you got to reword that and be like, like, hey, my condolences and my thoughts and prayers and all my positive energy are with you.
And like, I'm bringing dinner.
Yeah, I'm gonna come I'll give you a week because I know like family and all that. I've been through this myself. I'll come get you in a week and I'm taking you out and leave it there.
Yeah.
You know what? That person will look forward to that all week.
Did your dad know that you tried to take your life?
Yes, my dad read some of my book. My dad at that time though had dementia, and so he was a few different versions of himself at times. So he pulled me aside one day and he said, "I read your book," and I said, "Okay." He goes, "I don't agree with everything in there." I'm like, "I didn't think you would." So, but that was his way of telling me that he read it, and he told me I'm a great writer. He didn't say he really liked the book or anything like that, but he's like, "You surprised me in how well you write." And I said, "Well, thank you, Dad. That's very kind of you." So But he in his last years, he was definitely not as sound in mind as he normally was. So
How has his passing changed your perspective on life now?
well, I'll tell you, the biggest thing that's changed my perspective on life is me almost dying. And I've done that twice in the last few years. And so I hope we're good. I don't need to prove this to myself any more times. But
Second one on the bike.
yeah, the second one was the motorcycle. Yeah. The other one was my suicide attempt. And it sounds odd, but I've never felt more alive than almost dying. But when my father died, it taught me a lot of things for sure. It really, even though I've almost died, it didn't kick in as much as when my dad died, the reality of mortality. And so but it taught me a lot about myself. In my past, in a situation like that, like I was really down. I was very broken hearted and, a lot of things, but I wouldn't allow myself to go back into old habits or self-destructive habits. I didn't go back and numb myself with alcohol or drugs. I didn't get angry. I did all these, and I stayed very true to myself. And so it, again, provided this really glowing opportunity to intensify what I'd already begun doing, which was, this path of self-development. And it also definitely it put me into a spot too where I wanted to learn more about cancer. So I started reading papers and watching lectures and all these different things on cancer. And I became very dedicated to trying to understand it as much as I could, from not just from a medical perspective, but from all different like cultural perspectives. And I wanted to understand this disease so much that I was obsessed with it for quite a while. I may have made some phone calls to some some different places to try and gain more information and get into some heated conversations. I won't name any names or anything like that, but talked to some oncologists and different things and shared some of my opinions and met with a lot of resistance and different things. But so I think that was a bit of a distraction for me after my dad died, just as something for focus. I'd already started writing my second book, The Monarch Butterfly Effect. And then when my dad died, obviously that put a big wrench into that for a little while. I wasn't there. I couldn't write. And 3 weeks later, sadly, my stepson's dad passed away. So our home got quite dark. It was a very tough time. My stepson at the time was 17, and his dad was quite young, in his 40s, and had OD'd of fentanyl overdose. And so I had to shift my grieving very quickly to help him, and which was a very arduous process for sure. It just very heartbreaking. And but for months I wasn't able to really get back to my writing or get back to all the things. I had to cancel a lot of speaking opportunities I had because I wasn't in it. I didn't want to go into a school that I would normally just mesmerize these kids with my story and my my really funny jokes and just not have that and go in there and be lackluster. And so but yeah, it taught me a lot about myself. My dad dying, for sure. It taught me a lot about mortality. And it only emphasized my belief in that you have to live your life every day like it's a new life. Like I truly wake up every morning and I believe that every day is a brand new life. And we can write whatever we want to happen in that day. And, after my dad died, it only solidified that even so much more with me. Because you just never know. Life can be changed like that, right? Like through sickness, death. You can lose your job, your career, all these different, horrifying things can happen. And we have to be ready to respond to it and not react. And that's something that I definitely learned when my dad died.
When was the motorcycle accident? Before or after?
After, 9 months after. So I just started healing and writing again. And I'd been looking for this particular model of motorcycle. So you had my friend Pedro on your podcast previously. Yeah. So Pedro had the same bike, and I wanted to get one like his. And so I'd been searching for like a year for it. And finally I found one, and I bought it August 1st. And then I sunk a bunch of money into it and customized it so it looked super badass. And I think Pedro was mad at me for copying him. But whatever, it's flattery. And so, yeah, August 28th, I was out for a ride. I was heading out to Birds Hill Park, and I was on the perimeter. And I was going about 110 kilometers an hour, and just, enjoying life. And it was a beautiful, hot summer evening. It was around 6:30. And they had done some road work and not left signs there. And there was a asphalt job they had done where they left like a 6-inch kind of trench, and then they put asphalt that they were supposed to fill in it, and they left it on top of it, so it was like a speed bump on top of that. And when you drive on the highway in the summer, like asphalt has that kind of shimmer, so you can't really see anything. And so I didn't even see it. I hit it blind going 110 kilometers an hour, were the reports made to the RCMP and to the to Autopack. And anyways, yeah, I hit this thing, and man, my front end went this way, and then I tried to go this way. When I went this way, it snapped, and it catapulted me, and I went flying. So they estimated that I flew for about 30 feet before I hit the ground, and then they measured from where the bike initially caught to where I ended up was just over 400 feet. I rolled down the highway, flipping and over, and there's like semis driving by me, and my motorcycle at the beginning was flipping right behind me, and I thought it was going to land on me, and then it veered off 65 feet. They measure 67 feet out into the field, like just crazy. And yeah, it was wild. And so like I realized when I launched, I'm pretty versed in physics, and inertia was not going to be my friend here. And I was launching towards, a very hard, dense surface at a very high speed. And I was wearing a full face helmet as I did a lot. And so I guess instinctively, instead of putting my hands out to protect my face or head, I went like this. Oh, sorry, I hit the mic. And so I went like this. And so I basically kind of like tumbled and then log rolled like a cannonball down this highway for 345 feet was what they measured when I landed. And when I finally stopped moving, I realized I was alive. So that was cool. I was like, okay, this is good. But I had my eyes closed, and I remember just lying there, and I was terrified to move because I thought I was going to be paralyzed. Like, there's no way I survived this. Like, there's no way I should have survived this. And so for, I don't know how long it was, again, one of those moments where it could have been 20 minutes, it could have been a millisecond, but it felt forever. And finally, I started to wiggle my toes, and they responded, and then I could move my feet, and I was like, okay. And then I pulled my legs up, and it hurt so bad, but I'm like, okay. And then I did my hands, and I remember sitting up, and I just was like so pissed off. And I was trying to find my motorcycle, like where it was, and I couldn't see it because it was way back behind me in the field. And I was so pissed off because, like I said, I just bought this bike, and it's funny where your brain goes to when you're in shock. And I was like swearing and boom. And I took the helmet off, and it was a matte black helmet. And so, matte black kind of shows like fingerprints or like anything. And I remember looking at the helmet, and there wasn't even a speck of dust on it, not a scratch, not a mark. So I never hit my head. Wow. So I was like, okay, this is really good. And then I looked at my hand, and it was actually backwards. I was holding my helmet. My arm was completely wrong. And then I looked down, and my elbow was out over here and pouring blood. And I'm like, oh man, I'm bleeding everywhere. And then I coughed and spit out blood and some teeth that I broke from I guess I bit down so hard, like in fear. And I'm like, okay, so maybe this isn't so good, but I'm like, so I put the helmet down, and I remember staring out into the field, and this monarch butterfly was like just floating in front of me, and I was captivated by it. And while I was riding my motorcycle earlier, I was imagining my dad was beside me, like my ghost rider. My dad rode Harleys, and I kind of always had this dream of having a sidecar, take him out for one last ride, and it just never happened, sadly. But the last memory I have of my dad, like a good memory, we were sitting in his backyard and we were talking about monarch butterflies that were flying in the yard and talking about how they're on their way to Mexico. They migrate all the way from here to Mexico, and they arrive in Mexico at the end of October for the beginning of November for a celebration of the Day of the Dead. And the Day of Dead celebration is, they believe that these monarch butterflies all coming back, or spirits from loved ones coming back from the afterlife to visit us. And so there I am, and I'm just like, can't believe I'm alive. And this voice was in my head that told me I wasn't done yet when I was like flipping around and all this crazy stuff. And so I'm like watching this butterfly, and I'm like, okay, Dad, you're here, I get it. And very emotional moment. And then I stood up and I was really cranky and pissed off, and I started trying to walk home, and all these people were like, no, man, what are you doing? Lie down. And my back was like swollen out like Quasimodo. And so they had called ambulances. And so the fire department showed up first, and they were just like, they couldn't believe I was alive. And like, dude, you need to buy a lottery ticket tonight, man. Like, this is crazy. And then ambulances and RCMP and all these people show up, and I ended up, they strapped me to a hardboard and big cervical neck brace because they were prepping me. They're like, they for sure thought my spinal cord was damaged, but I was in such severe shock that I was walking. And I kept telling them, I'm like, this is all theater. I'm going home for dinner. I already ate dinner. I didn't even remember, but all this stuff. And
Second dinner.
Yeah, second dinner. I was pretty hungry guy, hungry bear. Anyways, they took me in the health science center by ambulance, and it was really wild. I was rushed in through the basement, through the ambulance. They bring you up, and I was going through the hallway. It's a lot like in those movies where you see all the lights going over, and the health science center is a sketchy place, man. Like, it's just overrun and full of like all kinds of people, and some of those people are not safe. And when you're strapped to a hardboard, like, I just felt my safety was very compromised. And there's people screaming and all this stuff. And this doctor comes over to me, and he puts his hand on my shoulder, and he goes, Jason McLean. And I said, yes. And he goes, my name is blah, blah, blah. I'm one of the doctors here. And he goes, but I'm not your doctor. He goes, but I just wanted to come over and tell you that I read your book, One Drop of Water. And he goes, it's helped save my life.
Wow.
He goes, I was going through a divorce, and I was so depressed, and I read your book, and it saved me, and so much that I gave it to my son. And he's now in rehab after reading your book. Wow. And so it was like this moment where I was in such a state of anxiousness, and like, God moves through people, whatever, and just brought this guy to me and say that. I just was like, it was such a moment, right?
I thought you were going to say, can I get a picture?
Yeah, well, that's what I was.
That's why I thought.
Yeah, you never know, right? Yeah. And so, and then they wheeled me into this room, like they had a trauma surgery team waiting for me. And so I'm still not really believing all of this is real. Like, I was just like, I felt like, I was in a lot of pain, and I knew like I for sure had some broken bones, and I was probably damaged. And so these two nurses start talking to me, and one of them was really funny. She had like this really very dry, blunt sense of humor, which I do. So I like got along great with her, and we were cracking all these stupid jokes to each other. But I was wearing my favorite t-shirt, and it was this vintage Avengers Iron Man t-shirt that was so cool. I'm a big Marvel guy, so I was like, and they had to cut the shirt off, and I'm like, no, you're not cutting the shirt off. They're like, we have to put like, you're going in for CT scans, and we have to get all these like, instruments and things all over you, and I'm just like, nope. So we argued, and she's like, what's funny is you are more upset and traumatized about your t-shirt than you are about this motorcycle accident that you were just in. I'm like, yes, that's true. So finally they cut it off. I kept the bag of all my clothes covered in blood, like so stupid. My jeans are shredded, like my back was bleeding, my legs were bleeding, like just crazy. And so it's funny, like I've communicated with her a couple times, and just been like, I'm still mad at you about my my Iron Man shirt or whatever. And she messaged me, she saw one of my posts, and she was like, talking about she wanted to get her man to come to one of my retreats. And I'm like, yeah, well, probably if you cut his clothes up or ruin his life, he's probably, I'll help him. So, but yeah, it was a pretty fun moment. But anyways, they ran me through all these tests, and finally they took me out of the neck brace and off the hardboard after the CT scans revealed that I had no spinal cord compromise. And the doctor was like pissed off. Like he was like, surgeons are like a very interesting breed of human beings. You know, they don't necessarily have the best personalities. They're like, you know, incredibly analytical and brilliant in their regard. But he was just so dumbfounded and like bewildered by the fact that he could not put his finger on how I was alive still, or how I was not paralyzed. It like bothered him. And so he came back and visited me like 3 more times to like just be like, and are you feeling, you know, I'm like, no, man, you know, like all these things, right? And to the point where they wanted to run tests again. And so I had, like, originally I had an angiogram.
They didn't believe you.
Well, yeah, it's like that same kind of moment. And, but they had found internal bleeding. My heart, there's a valve, like at the aorta, one of the valves was pumping blood into my stomach wall because of the impact. So, and that has a rate of fatality involved with it. So that had to be moderated, but I was still like, I told my fiance at the time, my wife was there. I'm like, go get me some chocolate chip cookies. And like, I wasn't supposed to eat, but I didn't care. I'm eating food and I got like stomach full of blood. And like, they're just like, who are you, man? Wow. So they started calling me unbreakable because I guess some people say I look a little bit like Bruce Willis. My head shaved. So if I wasn't wearing a toque, you'd see it even more. But so my nickname in there was Unbreakable because there was like, you know, there's no other explanation. So I kind of like that. That was kind of fun. But yeah, I got out of there and walked out of there with a limp. Yeah, it was months of PTSD after that. I relived the accident multiple times a day, and night times were really bad. Horrible nightmares. But some were really good. There was some times where I had these dreams where I'd wake up beside the motorcycle crash, but my dad was there with me. And so like, I almost wanted that dream to happen, but I had to go through like, sadly, all the nightmares, like, you know, stuff. But they credited my musculature to saving my life. They said if I didn't have the amount of muscle that I have and the strong skeletal system I have from years of working out and eating well, that act as a buffer and basically kept me alive. They said that there's no other explanation why I'm here. So I'll take that miracle all day long. But like I said, I'm good. Like, I don't need to keep proving the proving death wrong here.
Yeah.
You know, I don't need to cheat it any more times. I'm good.
What a like full circle moment from the first story that you told us about like your youngest memory of like on the bike.
Yeah.
And like your dad holding you and then like pushing you. And like,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, thanks for sharing, man.
Can I interrupt real quick? We are a little over 2 hours now. Phones are kept up to die.
So you're good.
Sure.
I got one question.
Yes.
One last question. How's your mental health?
How's my mental health? Great question.
That's it right now.
My mental health is amazing. My mental health is probably in the most optimal state it could be in. I wake up every day, like I was saying earlier, and I look at life in the most grateful and thankful way that it's a new life every day. And I sit in a subconscious state in the morning, in a bit of a hypnosis state, and I have mental repetitions I say, or in my mind, or I say them out loud every day to set myself up to have a strong day. I pray and I'm very thankful for things, and I offer back the energy of what can I give to the world today to make it better. I work out every morning. I get up early at 5:30. I go to the gym for an hour and a half to 2 hours every morning with my wife and push myself there. And then come home and it's writing, reading, learning every day. And then I go out and I dedicate my life to helping others. I work with children and families. I teach at a homeschool, so I teach kids and inspire them about nature and all these different things. So I'm always in a constant, perpetual cycle of learning and giving. So I think that service is one of the most powerful purposes we can have. Purpose is always great for us, but it's bigger when it's for including other people and lives. And so my mental health stays fluctuating from, if it was out of 10, anywhere from an 8 to 10 plus. I've dipped as low as maybe a 6 or a 5 here and there. You know, if I'm like haven't slept well for a couple nights and I'm cranky and whatever else, some different environmental factors can definitely play into it. But for the most, I've really taught myself how to be responsive instead of reactive to situations. So my mental health hovers very strongly. But also being in, like I said, that perpetual cycle of giving back to other people keeps me there, because I get inspired by the people that I meet. I'm inspired by everyone in this room right now. So that gives me energy, and that renews my energy constantly, right? Because I can't always give to everybody and then expect that my battery is going to stay fully charged. But when I get into a room like this and we have great conversations, you guys charge my batteries, right? And so the same thing happens when I get in front of kids, or I get in front of a room full of people, or whatever it is, or I make a content post or whatever, and I know that people are interacting with it because it's helping them. And so my mental health hovers strongly for sure. But I will be honest, I've worked my ass off to get to this point. I've been through so many valleys and then mountains and then, valleys, and then, had to cross floods and had battle storms. It hasn't been an easy road. But the fact is that I've always stayed moving forward on that road no matter what. And I've carved new paths off that road, and I've been really very, very lucky in my life. And I'm very grateful that I've been able to bring other people along that road with me now.
Last question for you today.
Yes.
We often say life is a roller coaster on this podcast.
Okay.
You're going to have the downs and you're going to have the ups.
Yes.
And we related this to the hole of depression today. And so for someone who is in that hole,
yes,
and they're seeing the dirt collapse, what's one step that they can take to get out?
The first step is you got to get out. To get out of your mind, you got to get into your body. And I teach this to people that are suffering from high anxiety or depression always. When we start to move our bodies, it changes our physiology of our cells, which change how we think. And so you need to start doing something. You need to start moving, because you can't stay in a state of depression if you're doing something in the new moment. So if you were to even start shadow boxing, and it sounds stupid, but if you were stuck in this moment and you started shadow boxing or running on the spot as fast as you can no longer have those same thoughts in your mind because you're too focused on the application of the repetition of the exercise you're doing. It's like humming. I tell people all the time when they're in a state of anxiety, if you hum your favorite song. I do Star Wars all the time, Darth Vader's theme song.
Oh, yeah.
I can't be focused on what's overwhelming me anymore because I'm too busy trying to remember the musical lines of the thing I'm humming. And it sounds really ridiculous to a lot of people. I teach 250-pound linebacker dudes to hum when they are getting too much anxiety before a football game. I'm like, hum the Backstreet Boys, man. It'll be stuck in your head. You won't get it out, whatever. But it's true. So these little things, it's change the movement, because the movement will trigger a whole chain reaction in the body. And the other thing is that you have to get past yourself. When we get stuck in mental health challenges, we often only see ourselves. We don't see past ourselves. I would tell that person, look to your partner, look to your friend, look to a stranger, and just talk. And it will make a world of difference. Conversations can change this world. They've changed mine, they've changed yours. It's how it happens. But the most important one is movement for sure.
That's very powerful.
Yeah.
I would agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never heard anyone articulate the way that you just did, but I can agree.
Yeah, awesome.
I can agree.
Yeah.
Jason, thank you so much.
Yeah, man, that was
sharing your
yeah.
story.
Thank you.
Appreciate it,
I
brother.
appreciate you having me.
I appreciate your vulnerability on this show, sharing your stories, and also your advice on how people can get out of this hole.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate being here.
If you want to check out more of the story, you know where to go. And until next time, thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Hey, awesome. That was great. I thought we were going to talk for three more hours.
Yeah, I didn't know that's how.
Glad I had a big breakfast.
I didn't know that's how. It's almost one. That's crazy.